Hello, and welcome to the JCC of Metro Detroit's 69th Annual Detroit Jewish Book Fair. My name is Brenda Brook, and I'm chair of the Book Fair Steering Committee, and it's my pleasure to welcome you on this Thursday afternoon to hear Dan Paris talk about his book, As Needed for Pain, a Memoir of Addiction, presented in partnership with the 2020 Ann Arbor Jewish Book Festival. The goal of the Detroit Jewish Book Fair is to bring the best new Jewish books and authors from around the world to Metro Detroit. And this year, the rooms we're all sitting in may be different, but that goal remains the same. The book fair runs through December 9th, and we have an exceptional lineup of events planned. To see our full schedule, learn about ways to support book fair, watch events you may have missed, and find our online store where you can find As Needed for Pain and many other hand-selected books and gifts, visit our website, culturalarts.jccdet.org/bookfair. This year, in order to provide as much programming to the community as possible, we've made all of our events free of charge. So if you enjoy this event and other book fair events, please consider becoming a patron and donating to book fair. You can do both of these at our website, culturalarts.jccdet.org/bookfair. We rely on community support to make this event possible, so thank you in advance for becoming part of our family. The book fair team would like to thank the Henry Ford Maple Grove Center for being a supporter of this event today. We have a really special event planned for you, and we want you to be a part of it. You can ask questions and offer comments in the YouTube comment section below, or by texting to the number in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. Our speakers have a great discussion prepared, and they'll take as many of your questions as they can. And while you're here at our new YouTube channel, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and click the reminder bell, and that way you'll never miss any of our exciting events. The focus of today's discussion is the book, As Needed for Pain, a Memoir of Addiction. We have with us the author of the book, Dan Paris, as well as Andrew Essex, who will moderate the discussion. From 2000 to 2015, Dan Paris was a men's media star as editor of Details magazine. But underneath the gloss, he was struggling with an opioid addiction, taking up to 60 painkillers a day. Dan's memoir shares his journey back from the depths of this addiction. While Dan was editor of Details, the magazine won many awards, including 2 National Magazine Awards. Prior to his time there, he spent 9 years at W Magazine, overseeing bureaus in Paris, London, and Milan. Andrew Essex is a business executive and author, co-founder of the creative marketing services company Plan A, and he's the former CEO of Tribeca Enterprises, the parent company of the Tribeca Film Festival. So please join me in welcoming Dan Paris and Andrew Essex.
Hey there, Dan. Nice to see you. How are you today?
I'm good, thanks. How are you?
Excellent. So I'm going to put you through the ringer now.
Bring it on.
Let's talk about your amazing book, As Needed for Pain. Now, Brenda gave a nice summary. It's a memoir of addiction. It's also a story of what it was like to work in the media business in the rollicking aughts. But I'd wonder if you could summarize the book in your own words. What is As Needed for Pain about?
Wow, that's a very simple question with no simple answer, I think. It's about my journey, and that journey got complicated, as journeys tend to do. But it's a coming of age story, mixed in with an addiction memoir. So I always struggled to fit in from my earliest childhood memories. I can recall never quite feeling like one of the guys. I always wanted to feel like one of the guys, but I never did. And, I think as I write in the book, I felt like everybody had been given a manual, a blueprint. Every boy, every girl, every man, every woman had one of these manuals on how to go about living your life but I never got one. When they got to me, they ran out.
Right.
So I always felt this sense of not belonging, not feeling like one of the guys, and I went on to actually, run a magazine for guys, and it was my job to tell guys how they should be feeling and what they should be thinking, and that's the great irony, because I always struggled with that, and along the way, I developed a fairly profound addiction to prescription painkillers. And the book spends a lot of time focusing in on my addiction, my struggle, my many attempts to stop. And listen, I'm really grateful to be here talking to you, obviously an old friend, but I'm really grateful to be here talking to anyone, quite frankly, because I shouldn't be here, because this addiction should have killed me, and it didn't.
So we're talking about two things: existential issues, what it is to be a man, how to become a man, but also some very fundamental tactical issues. So I wonder if you could address the latter first. So how do you actually become an addict? It couldn't be more apropos right now. I think a lot of people are concerned about their own family members starting to take painkillers. How does it happen? How do you get pulled into the funnel of addiction?
It's a great and important question. My story is uniquely mine, obviously, and there are a number of things about my story that make it, pretty interesting. And the job that I had, the jobs that I had in my career, afforded me access to some extraordinary cultural figures, and I got to meet and be around some really amazing people and travel and do some really amazing things. And that stuff is unique to me. At the end of the day, though, my story is sadly incredibly common. And I, like so many other people in this country, injured myself and was prescribed opioid prescription painkillers to help manage the pain that I was feeling, and developed an addiction. Developed an addiction to them. And so, for me, it started, very kind of routinely and very innocently with an injury and a prescription for Vicodin. And what happened with me, and I think what we're seeing happens all too sadly, all too frequently in this country, is that an addiction develops after taking these pills for even a brief period of time. And that was the case with me. And so for me, it was like lighting a fuse on a stick of dynamite. And it ultimately sort of blew up into a full-blown addiction. But it happens quickly. It happens easily. It does not happen to everyone. And I don't want to suggest that it does, but it happens to far too many people. And so, and then once the addiction takes hold, Andrew, you're hard pressed to wriggle free, and to break away from it. Certainly I was.
Do you mind if we just drill down on that a little bit more? Because so many people are concerned with this in such a massive societal issue. And just to go back to the book, which everyone should read, you address it in such an important and thorough way, and also such an entertaining way. But it is obviously a very serious subject. So I'm sure plenty of people who are watching this have a grandmother who's broken their hip, or a son who's cracked a rib. And I wonder if you can give them some advice, because pain is a real thing. There's, of course, spiritual pain, but physical pain. Having been through one end of the spectrum and come out and lived to talk about it, what is the appropriate response to pain?
Well, that's also a great question, and I think it's a question that a lot of doctors are asking themselves right now. Pain is one of the only things that I can think of, and I'm not a doctor, but pain, although I've pretended to be a doctor, pain is one of the only things that you, in the sort of medical sphere, that you can't do a lab test for. right? You can, this hurts. I'm feeling this. I'm having a temperature. My heart's racing. They can take blood. They can do things. They can hook you up to devices that help to accurately indicate what's wrong with you. And pain, however, there's no test for pain. Still today, you go into a doctor's office and there's like a couple of emojis, basically, from a smile to a frown or whatever,
right.
And everything in between. And it is it's on the honor system, right? You say, well, where are you on this scale of 1 to 10? And you can tell the truth,
right?
Or you can lie, which I chose to do, and that's a very easy test to manipulate. And I certainly manipulated it, but I believe very strongly in the use of pain medications to treat pain. I'm not. I've met a number of addicts in recovery, like I am, that are like, these drugs should be outlawed. They should, I don't believe that. I believe that pain is real. I believe that people should have comfort and should do anything that they can to alleviate the pain that they are feeling. What I'll say on top of that is that these drugs were initially designed for end-of-life care. People that were in excruciating pain, suffering from really kind of cruel and vicious diseases, or people that have been in horrible, traumatic accidents and so suffering injuries and really needed them to get through the day. What happened is that these pharmaceutical companies that manufacture these drugs spent hundreds of millions of dollars marketing these drugs, not even to the patient, but actually to the doctors, as sort of selling them and selling the fact that there were broader uses for these drugs, and that they and misrepresenting just how habit forming these drugs were. So I think that pain is real. I believe pain should be treated. I will always advocate for people trying a number of treatments to help relieve them of their pain. But if opioids are something that doctors are recommending, then I think that's okay. I just think it's important to be incredibly careful with them.
And then last question on this subject, but because the Today Show discussed it, because the New York Times discussed it, from your perspective, where is the moral hazard or moral responsibility? Is it on the addict, the doctor, or the pharmaceutical company? Can you just unpack that complex triangle?
Of course. I mean, I accept responsibility for my own actions. I made choices. It got to a point where there really was no longer a choice, where I needed them to get out of bed in the morning. I needed them to get through my day. I needed them to get back into bed at the end of the day. But along the way, I made choices. And so I think that it's all three parties need to accept some accountability. There's the patient, and then, of course, as you mentioned, the doctors and the pharmaceutical industry. I do not blame doctors. My mom, my unbelievably loving Jewish mom, we're happy to come back to her. Said, in the moment, like, oh my God, these doctors should not be practicing medicine. Look, I would go in and I would con these doctors. Addicts are con artists. We are liars and con artists, and we will do anything we can to protect our secret, which is the addiction. And I was certainly no different. I think the medical community is complicit to a degree, and I certainly think the pharmaceutical industry is, and I think that's proven true by recent $8 billion settlement by Purdue and other manufacturers of these drugs. But at the end of the day, I had a hand in it also, for sure.
Well, as someone who's read the book, you sure did. And you said you made choices. You made some pretty remarkable choices, pretty, let's face it, entertaining and risky choices, like a character out of a lost episode of Breaking Bad. And I wonder if you could talk about some of the things that you did, some pretty crazy things, particularly the Tijuana trips. Just, they're I don't mean to exploit what you did, but it's so unbelievable what a person will get up to in search of that high.
Yeah, I mean, once the train is careening down the tracks at excessive speeds, it is very difficult to slow it down again. And so, for me, I was feeding a habit that had grown larger than I anticipated it could possibly grow. And so, I started taking 4 pills at a time, and that went to 6. I stuck more or less with even numbers until the very end. I don't know why, but I did. So 2, then 4, then 6, then 8. I settled in ultimately at around 15 pills at a time, which I was taking about 4 times a day, which is around 60 pills a day. And so it's hard to maintain a supply when you are taking that many pills, because you could go to a doctor's office and they could say, here's 30 pills, and that would be gone by lunchtime, And so that was.
Sure, it's not funny.
It is. I mean, it's both funny and not
right,
funny.
Exactly. Right.
It's. I can certainly see how it's entertaining.
Yeah.
And I'm very comfortable kind of laughing about it, or it's certainly nothing to make light of, obviously, and I know that you know that. But I have found that in order to kind of look back at my experiences, I have to be able to laugh about some of the ridiculous things that I did, including going down to Tijuana to acquire pills, and I had been invited to go on the Bill Maher show, Politically Incorrect, with Bill Maher, and so I was living and working in New York, and I had to fly out to Los Angeles for that appearance, and scheduled my flight to San Diego, California, instead of Los Angeles, rented a car, drove down to Tijuana, where I was quite certain I would be able to find a morally questionable pharmacist, which I did after just a relatively easy search. And I had thousands of dollars with me that I intended to spend in these pharmacies. So I found a pharmacy, and I bought 1,000 tablets of extra strength Vicodin. And it's important to note, by the way, that there are 2 key ingredients in extra strength Vicodin, or what is referred to as Vicodin ES, the ES meaning extra strength. There's the active opioid, which is hydrocodone, but there's also acetaminophen in there. That's Tylenol.
Mm-hmm.
And so every tablet of extra strength Vicodin is 1 extra strength Tylenol paired with the active ingredient of hydrocodone. So in addition to taking all of that, all those sort of opiates, I was also taking the equivalent of a small bottle of extra strength Tylenol every day. And that's extraordinary, and I'm really grateful to be alive. But so just to circle back to Tijuana for a second, I'm in this rental car. I made my score. I felt like a cinema villain,
Walter White.
Exactly.
Yeah, right.
And here I was, this preppy Jewish kid with, like a pair of khakis and like a button-down shirt and like a backpack or a satchel that I had, and I paid the dealer. I paid the pharmacist / dealer for the pills, put them in my backpack, threw the backpack in the trunk of my car, and was headed back to California, where I was going to drive up to LA and then appear on Politically Incorrect with Bill Maher. What I didn't count on was that there would be Border Patrol agents with drug sniffing
Wow.
dogs at the border. And as I'm approaching the border, and everything kind of merges into a few lanes, and you go through these checkpoints. I saw these agents with these dogs, and I had this moment of just sheer panic of, wow, like, I'm sure they're trained, these dogs are, to sniff out marijuana or heroin or cocaine.
Right, exactly.
But like, can they also smell pills? And so I had this moment where I, was kind of white knuckling the steering wheel and kind of inching my way toward the border, and ultimately I was waved through without any issue. But to go back to your original question, the crazy things, the things that you do to feed a habit. I was prepared for anything, and meaning I was going to accept anything. If I got arrested and ended up in a Mexican jail or whatever it was, I was willing to do anything to continue to feed this habit. And I would even take pills at night. I would often take a few more than I would normally take during the day to get a little bit of a push into kind of unconsciousness, or sleep. And I would spill out a couple of pills. I'd already taken 15. I would spill out a couple more into my hand and be like, this is the lift I need to help me really kind of unplug for the day. And I would look at those pills and I would think, okay, this could kill me. I would think that. But it never stopped me from taking them. I don't think I was suicidal. I don't think I had a death wish. But I was prepared to die in pursuit of a high that I really couldn't feel anymore anyway, if I'm being honest.
Mm-hmm.
Your judgment is clouded. You are not making the sound decisions. You are only focused on the addiction.
Does your liver have a book deal?
The first thing that I did when I got sober, one of the first things that I did when I got sober was to have a complete physical and explained everything that I had been doing to my doctor. And he said, all right, we need to look into your liver today. Okay. And I dodged a lot of bullets, Andrew, and I really did.
So you mentioned getting sober. So let's talk about that for a minute. Again, the book is so rich. There are parts that stand out in my mind, and there are things that I need further explanation on.
Okay.
And again, I encourage everyone to get the book. So in my childhood, there were two films that I can recall that really kept me on the straight and narrow. There was Scared Straight, which illustrated what happened if you went to prison. And there were myriad programs. I can't even think of one that showed someone going through cold turkey. And cold turkey looked so horrible that you didn't want to become an addict. That was one of the things that sort of kept me from addiction, because something bad would happen, yet you could never break it. So can you just tell us a little bit about the process of getting clean? And how did you physically do it? And what is it like? Is it like they show you on TV?
Those fictional depictions of someone going through withdrawal, dealing with the acute physical symptoms of withdrawal, where, or as they say, like, kicking or whatever, where you see in a film someone sweating and tossing and turning and vomiting or worse, in agony. They're remarkably accurate, and so your body, is demanding those drugs, and your brain is demanding them, and when you withhold them, your body needs to go through this process, which is absolutely awful. I had gone through that. I had dealt with those symptoms of withdrawal very, very often. One of the addict's biggest fears, next to being exposed as an addict, of course, is running out of the drug that they're addicted to. And I would run out often because I was taking
so much. Right.
Exactly, like the amounts were so significant. I would run out, and it's not easy to run when you live in New York City. You can't just sort of like get to Tijuana, every month. And so I would go through these symptoms all the time, and I had such a fear of them because I knew how brutal they were, and how painful it felt. But that was a part of my journey also, where the sort of starting and stopping. I would run out and wouldn't be able to get more for a couple of days, and would have to kind of grin and bear it for a couple of days. And it's just awful. At the very end, when I finally got sober, I was far more determined to tolerate those symptoms than I had ever been before. Because I think at that moment, for the first time, I was truly committed to getting sober. I had tried to stop on my own a number of times, and really don't recommend doing that on your own, because it's incredibly difficult to do without support. And I don't necessarily mean medical support, but I mean sort of emotional support. But I was pretty determined, and that last time, those physical symptoms persisted in some form or another for several weeks. It wasn't brutal. It wasn't brutal the entire time. Really, just the first 3 to 5 days were. But those symptoms kind of lingered for a while.
So the other amazing thing about the book is that all this happens in the context of being a men's magazine editor in the aughts, as I said before. And that's a unique life. You and I worked together. We experienced it. It was a very heady time. So you're surrounded by people like Tom Ford at the height of Gucci, lots of actors, musicians. Can you just talk a bit about that milieu and what that was like?
I mean, it was a really great time. Right. I mean, if I'm able to compartmentalize for a second and just sort of put the addiction over here for a moment, I can tell you that it was extraordinary to be running a men's magazine. It was called Details. So Details magazine, published by one of the biggest luxury magazine publishers in the world, Condé Nast. It was an extraordinary time to be in that world, and it was, as you know, the end of an era, and so I like to think that I was able to ride the last great wave of magazine publishing, and when you're the editor-in-chief of a magazine like that, not a whole lot that you can't get access to. Again, I'm not speaking about drugs. People want to talk to you. People want to be in your magazine. So from movie stars to musicians to fashion designers, all sorts of kind of cultural leaders were there for me to meet and talk to and engage with, and it was pretty extraordinary. you layer a drug addiction on top of that, and it certainly complicates things. I've been asked a number of times if I was a functioning addict, because people talk a lot about functioning addicts, and I was definitely an addict hiding in plain sight, and there's a lot of that going on in every community, the Jewish community as well, but in every community across this country, and addiction is real, and addiction is rampant. But I don't think I was as high functioning as some people have suggested, and you would know this because we worked together. But I was not very present. I only really cared about the addiction, and so I had this amazing job. I had access to all of these amazing people. I was meeting with and speaking to real cultural influencers and leaders, and wow, it was just amazing. But I didn't really care about that, and I didn't care too much about the job, quite frankly. I mean, if I'm being honest, I just didn't. And so, and you'll know this because there would be unexplained absences from work, or mood swings and irritability, and I, all of that though was kind of not ignored, but was because I was the boss, and because the magazine was doing well, thanks, in large part to people like yourself and other talented folks working at the magazine. No one really said anything, and so I think it's generally assumed that people at the top of creative industries have something a little off, and I'm sure that people looked at me and were like, whatever,
Eccentric, right?
Yeah.
Eccentric comes with the territory.
Yeah, this is just some creative eccentric guy, and look, the business is doing well, so onward.
So I just want to understand this. In the hierarchy of addiction, the need to get high, the need to get another dose of pills exceeds the need to have access to a Porsche or an IWC watch or time with a rock star or a movie star. It's that powerful that everything else is superfluous.
Andrew, it exceeds everything. It is the only focus, and it was my only priority, not just my top priority,
Wow.
but my only priority. And any career advancement, any relationship, whether it be with family, with spouse, with children, which I did not have at the time, take a back seat to the need to get more and take more drugs. And so for me, while here I was at this sort of extraordinary place for a young man to be, running a major national magazine. For those young viewers, magazines are. No, I'm kidding. The industry, things have evolved quite a bit. Yeah. So it was a great, amazing place to be, and I'm incredibly proud of my career. But I didn't care, and I think those cracks showed. I think it was clear to anyone that was in close proximity, that was in my orbit, that I didn't care about a whole hell of a lot. And while people may not have known that I was doing drugs, surely people knew that something was off.
So I'm gonna push back on that because I worked with you, and I would say some of that's true, but you always cared about the depiction of men and what it meant to be a man. And I'm gonna bring us back to something you said early in the conversation. You had some anxiety, ambivalence about how to be a man. We are at the Detroit Jewish Book Fair. There's obviously a Yiddish word, mensch, which is something that's completely proliferated into American popular culture. Everyone wants to be a mensch. And we also coined a concept of the metrosexual, which was a certain type of man, circa 2000. So slightly long-winded question, but what has the experience taught you about how to be a man? Do you regret any depiction of men that you helped promulgate? What is the right way to be a man today from your point of view?
Wow. That's
Or to be a bench?
That's a good question. And listen, I'm raising 3 young men. And so this is something that I spent a lot of time thinking about and talking about with my boys. In the moment, back in the early 2000s, I appreciate you saying that. I cared about the magazine. I cared about the work we were doing. I just didn't care to do any of the work.
Yes.
The
bigger picture of manliness was really key to what you did on a daily basis.
I believed back then that, I still believe, but back then it was a little bit of a contrarian sort of point of view, and I know you believed it and others as well, that men shouldn't be defined, by these sort of few classic ideas that had for generations defined us, interest in sports, interest in, seeing pictures of scantily clad women, interest in the idea that men weren't interested in culture, the idea that men weren't interested in, that they would pick up the sports page out of the paper and not, the culture section and read, and be comfortable and confident, reading about some art exhibit or an opera or, some interesting chef or something like that. And I believe that men actually did have those interests, and that not all men were sort of cut from the same loincloth, if you will. And so we built a magazine for an audience of men like that. Today, I think that I teach my children I do my best to teach my children to be a mensch. I have 3 boys, as I said, and 13 and almost 10-year-old twins. And we're constantly talking about kindness and compassion. And we spend a lot of time talking about not needing to fit in to the group that you are not meant to fit into. And I didn't have conversations like that when I was a kid. And it's not for lack of loving family or anything like that, but I didn't have conversations like that when I was a kid. And so I felt the need to be like my older brother. My older brother was, whom I love dearly, was the town star. He was captain of the lacrosse team. He was a straight A student, went on to an Ivy League college. He had tons and tons of friends and girlfriends constantly swirling around him. I didn't have that. I was like a magic nerd. I was doing magic tricks in my basement and teaching myself how to juggle and obsessing about, over David Copperfield and things like that. I wasn't that person, but I felt like I needed to be that person because that was the ideal in my house. This was my older brother. We look at our older brothers with such love and admiration that it's difficult not to measure ourselves against them. And I certainly did. And so I spent a lot of time talking to my kids about doing what feels right for them, and not feeling like they need to check certain boxes in order to fit in, and like find your group, find your people. Doesn't matter if those people are talking about Star Wars or the Lakers. It doesn't matter, and maybe they're talking about both. But don't feel like you need to kind of force yourself into a box that you don't fit.
So this childhood you describe, if I remember correctly, is in a Jewish community in the suburbs of Baltimore.
That's right.
Yeah. So the Barry Sonnenfeld district of America.
Yeah, Barry Levinson.
So excuse me, Barry Levinson.
Yeah.
So can you talk a bit, if you're comfortable, with how Judaism informed your childhood, and if you didn't fit in, why not?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I grew up in a Jewish home, but like a Reformed Jewish home. We were high holiday Jews. And I did go to a Jewish day school until 8th grade. 6th grade, excuse me, which I loved. I was bar mitzvahed, but I'm always more culturally Jewish than religiously Jewish, if that makes sense.
Yeah, of course.
But interestingly, my faith got a whole lot stronger once I became sober. And for me, belief in a higher power, having a spiritual connection, is incredibly important. And I don't know that grew out of my childhood. I don't think it did. Proud Jewish family, proud, almost, very Jewish, upper middle class community called Pikesville in the suburbs of Baltimore. And I would, as I write in the book, I would think, oh, my poor Jewish mother. As I was doing things, very reckless things, I would think, oh God, if my mother saw this or found out about this, like it would just put her in the ground,
So to that point, someone's got a question, and there are so many good questions here. I'll segue into this section of the conversation. So someone asked if you felt like you were unable to show vulnerability. That in some families, men were not encouraged to cry. Right? It goes back to the depiction of masculinity, that if you were permitted to show vulnerability, this wouldn't have happened.
That's a great question. No, I was permitted to show vulnerability, and I grew up with an incredibly loving and sensitive family, and we were and are an emotional bunch, and so that wasn't the issue. I think more the issue, and that's a really great question, by the way, because there are so many families where at least historically, men are taught, like, men don't cry, tough it out. You can, and that was not my house. And, but I completely understand and appreciate the question. For me, it was more of an issue of just never quite understanding who I was and where I fit in, and having a very deep insecurity around what type of guy I was. I wasn't terribly athletic. I wasn't a great student. I didn't have a ton of friends or girlfriends. And so in contrast to my brother, who it bears noting is just like the loveliest guy on the face of the earth, was then and continues to this day to be just the most loving and caring big brother. But I, like so many of us do, was comparing myself to what was right in front of me and I didn't check those boxes. And so it was more an insecurity around who I was and what kind of guy I was than a fear of showing some form of vulnerability.
So you talked about your children and your brother, but I imagine there's a lot of human wreckage that comes from this kind of behavior. Someone wants to know how the addiction affected your personal relationships.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. The addiction affected my personal relationships significantly. As I said, the only priority that I had were the drugs. And so it was very difficult for me to prioritize in any meaningful way any relationship, personal or professional. That said, being in a relationship with an active addict or alcoholic is incredibly difficult. And so I was difficult to be around. I was irritable. People around me would often ask, what's wrong with you? Which really wound me up. This isn't normal behavior. The word normal became like a trigger for me. Because the people that are around addicts and alcoholics really suffer, greatly. And so my relationships were strained, and I would start to withdraw because as soon as I sensed, anytime anyone said, "What's wrong with you?" I would be like, "Oh, okay, I need to move away from this person before they discover what's going on," and I would. There's gaslighting involved. I would do everything I could to make you feel like, to make you feel bad for thinking something was wrong with me, but I would also try to make you feel like something was wrong with you. For example, I never wanted to go out and be social. And my fiance / wife at the time, now ex-wife, but wife at the time, would be like, "Come on, can't we just go to this thing?" And I would, instead of saying sure, I would say no, and I always said no, so it became a source of tension. And then I would try to turn it and be like, "What's wrong with you that you need to be around these people? You need people fawning on you," or whatever it was. It's incredibly unhealthy, but I did it. My relationships were strained, to say the least.
What's not clear to me is, what was the single lever that made you quit? And I feel that people ask this question: Was there someone you did this for? Was there a moment of realization? What actually switched the lever the other direction?
People often ask, "Hey, what was your bottom?" And by that they mean, what was the low point that made you want to stop? For me, I wanted to stop for a while, and I tried to stop for a while on my own. I recognized that I had a problem, but I just couldn't stop. My wife at the time was pregnant with our oldest child, and discovered that I'd been lying to her about my addiction, and discovered that I was an active addict, and really, kind of forced it in ways that I needed. And I want to stress that, I was ready for it. You have to be ready for it. There's a question that I am looking at now from someone about approaching someone who needs help, and I can talk about that as well. But I was ready to stop, and so I did, with a lot of love and support from my family, and I stopped shortly before my oldest son was born, and I've been sober for 13 years. which is an absolute, blessing. But people have asked me a lot over the years about helping those that need help, and the ideas of interventions and things like that. And I'm sure interventions can be incredibly effective, of course. What I have found, though, is that if the addict isn't ready to stop, the addict is not going to stop. And that's an awful thing to hear, right? Because it means you really can't help. You can help, and you can be supportive, and you can encourage the addict to talk about this. I believe not so much in what's been referred to as tough love, like get out and get your shit together. In as much as I believe in calling the addict out on their behavior, but doing it in a gentle, loving, and supportive way. Because an addict will retreat, as I just said I did when someone asked about the strain that this put on my personal relationships. You sort of build a fortress around yourself. And again, you're protecting this addiction. That's what you're protecting. Go ahead.
So just in terms of intervening with a family member, you're prescribing a thoughtful, empathic approach, but an approach.
I'm absolutely advocating for an approach. I think it's incredibly important to call people out on what you see and what you believe you're seeing, but to say how can I help you? Can we talk about this? Can we, and interventions work. I have friends that are interventionists.
Do they really? You mean like the surprise party version of the intervention?
Yes, exactly. But again, they only work when the addict, him or herself, has also had enough. And that happens where you come to someone and you be like, look at what you've been doing over the course of the last decade or number of years or year or whatever it is. It's unbelievably destructive, not just to you, but to our entire family or entire workplace or whatever it is. And sometimes, you will find that the addict will be relieved, be like, I know, I know, let's go, but sometimes that won't be the case. And that person will get up and storm out of the room and may not talk to you again or for some time. I believe in not ignoring what you're seeing, and I certainly don't believe in enabling. Don't give money. Don't offer any support that will allow them to continue to fuel the addiction.
So we're almost out of time, so I'm going to ask you one more question, and I don't necessarily want to put you in the position of being a social philosopher, but there's a lot of talk about national legalization of marijuana, about adopting other policies that give addicts access to medication so they don't engage in criminal activity. What's your general point of view on the legalization of drugs?
So I'm going to add another layer to the question, and then I'll come to that. I think it's really important on a national level. A couple of things. One, I think we have to work to destigmatize addiction. I wrote my book in order to help destigmatize this disease. And this is what it is. It is a disease. It is categorized as such by the American Medical Association. It is not a moral failing. It is truly part of the human condition, and it is a disease, right? So the more we are out, addicts in recovery like myself, like I said, I've been sober for 13 years, the more people like this that are talking about addiction and alcoholism, the better it will be with respect to destigmatizing. One. Two, I think as a country, we have to work on education, prevention, and treatment, right? It cannot be easier to get the drug than it is to get the treatment. And that's where we are right now. It's just so much easier to get more drugs than it is to find help. And so we need to change that. With respect to decriminalization, I'm all for it. I think, look, we need to be careful. We need to be smart about how we approach this. certainly with marijuana, I don't know that I would add all drugs into that. I know that there are some people that do. Wouldn't go that far, but certainly with marijuana. Look, I'm raising 3 young men, and they all know that I'm a drug addict. They all know that I'm sober. One of the great blessings of my life is that my children, all 3 of them, have only ever known me as a sober man, and that's a gift. Thank you. So I'm tremendously grateful for that. But I'm also open about this illness, and I'm open about my struggle with it, and I'm open about my sort of journey, which is a word I've used a couple of times through the course of this talk, and not a word that I love, but this has been my path, and I share with them around it, and I talk to them about the things that they're going to encounter in their own journeys. People offering them things, talking about things, wanting to try things. So I think decriminalization of marijuana, legalization, I think that's fine and seems to be a smart approach. I am a little concerned about anything significantly heavier than that.
All right, Dan. Well, thank you very much. You've been very frank. It's a great talk. The book is As Needed for Pain, a Memoir of Addiction, available at all book platforms near you. I highly recommend it. We're going to bring Brenda back to say goodbye.
Thank you, Dan and Andrew, for being with us and for such an honest and revealing conversation. And thank you to all of you at home for joining us today. Our next event is today at 4 o'clock, when you'll meet Jason Rosenthal, author of My Wife Said You May Want to Marry Me. Remember to like this video, subscribe to our new YouTube channel, and visit our website, culturalarts.jccdet.org/bookfair, for our full schedule to buy Dan's book and find ways to get involved. Stay safe and have a great day.